Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, wherever you are, if it is morning, evening, or afternoon. I'm Ashley Stearns, and I work for the British Consulate in New York with the Department for International Trade, heading up all things tech for us. But today, this is not a tech-specific event. This is actually part 2 of a series that we have been doing with Ellis Porter over the past couple of months to try and help UK companies either with offices already in the US or UK companies that are looking at expanding into the US with all of their immigration questions and concerns coming into the country during the times of COVID-19. So I am very excited to be joining you again to specifically talk about basically, can you go home for the holidays if you are a UK citizen that is living in the US? But yet we will also talk about some other immigration issues and some updates that have come up. So very excited to be joined by Mark and Arvinder at Ellis Porter Immigration Attorneys.
Okay, thanks, Ashley. Appreciate the introduction, and yes, good morning and good afternoon to everyone joining us today. We appreciate it, and hope to provide you some valuable information today. As Ashley said, today's presenters are going to be myself. I'm the managing attorney of Ellis Porter here in the United States. Ashley will also be presenting a few slides on behalf of the UK's DIT, and we very much appreciate the invitation to speak to the group today and share some information with all of you. And then also joining us and presenting today will be my attorney colleague Arvinder Ubi, who is the director of Ellis Porter's office in the UK, which is based in London. Next slide. Okay, so before we dive in, I want to give you a little bit of background about Ellis Porter. We are an immigration-only firm. That's all we do exclusively. Our practice is focused on immigration and global mobility. So that means we work on U.S. visas, global visas, and other global mobility issues. We have over 65 immigration professionals, which makes us one of the 15 largest immigration firms in the U.S. But of interest to, I think, this group is we are the second largest U.S. immigration firm with a UK presence. There's one firm that works with some of the really big, huge international companies, but then we are the largest firm that works with kind of the small to middle market size companies who are based in the UK, who have operations in the United States, or who are looking to expand to the United States. We are and Arvinder, as I mentioned, leads up our UK office. Arvinder is from the UK. He worked at Ellis Porter in the US for about 5 years and has since relocated back to the UK and helped us launch our office there, which for us was strategically important, because we do have a lot of clients in the automotive industry, the finance industry, technology industry, who are based in the UK but also throughout Europe. And having boots on the ground in the UK has allowed us to better, and in the same time zones, has allowed us to better serve our clients in the UK and throughout Europe. We are a full service immigration firm, so even though we focus just on immigration, we basically have experts who handle every element of US immigration as well as global visas. Focusing mostly on working with business-based visas for companies, as well as investment-based visas and individual immigration visas as well. We do have three U.S. offices, one in Metro Detroit, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Chicago, and then, as mentioned, we also have our office in the UK. So go ahead, next slide, RJ. So when we typically are working with businesses and individuals in the UK, here are the types of things that we're able to help with. One, if you're a company in the UK, you're looking to establish a new office in the United States and staff it with key personnel. There's a lot of hurdles to get through to make that happen, but it's very doable, and we work with those companies to make sure that they can get the people to the U.S. that they need to take advantage of market opportunities in the United States. Once they're here, we also help them to as they hire new employees in the U.S. who are foreign nationals, we help them manage that process and make sure they're remaining compliant with U.S. immigration laws that would apply to U.S. employers and their employees. To the extent you're a company who is taking on direct investment or you've taken advantage companies to manage those. Also, sometimes your expansion of the U.S. is a result of a merger or an acquisition, and those transactions too have unique immigration implications, and we can help provide strategic guidance with that. And then through partnerships with our RSM, our international tax partner, we can also provide some very integrated services around immigration, global mobility, and international tax, because these issues tend to be very interrelated. There's a lot of overlap, and it's nice to have a coordinated team working through those issues with you. And so if those are the kind of issues you're facing as you are setting up new operations in the U.S., we are able to help you with that. The U.S. and the U.K. have a long-standing business relationship between the two companies. Lots of the U.K. is one of the most popular countries to establish new companies in the United States, and we expect that to continue to be the case as we move forward. And so it's just important to make sure that as you expand your company and you're looking to take advantage of opportunities in the U.S. market, that you have the right partners in place to help you plan these issues to make sure that an immigration problem isn't something that's going to hold you back from seizing all the opportunities ahead of you. Okay, next slide, RJ. So with that, I want to pass it off to Ashley to just give a refresher to some of you about the UK's Department for International Trade and all the ways that they can help UK companies who are looking to do business in the United States. Ashley?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. So at the crux of it, we are here to help any UK company that is looking to grow and expand internationally. We have an entire team of professionals called International Trade Advisors based in the UK, some of whom are on this call right now, who are there to help walk you through your business and make sure that you are prepared to export either your goods or your services and really make your company an international company. So my role in the US is geared towards UK companies that are looking to come into the US. We help companies of all shapes and sizes across all industry verticals. We have 9 offices across the US that are each staffed with people that are more than happy to help UK companies understand the differences between the localities, your client opportunities, and what it's like to do business in each of the different cities across the US, and as well as help you actually launch your office. So RJ, next slide, please. So like I said, we help companies at all stages of their process in international growth. So whether UK companies are just exploring coming into the US, we can help you figure out exactly what that business strategy looks like for you. If you have actually already started selling into the US, we can also help provide client opportunities and understanding of the individual markets within the US. And I think most importantly, especially for this session, is helping companies that are in that expansion and growing phase, meaning that your company has decided that you need to put down a physical location in the US as your next step in that growth process. So as I said, we are here to help. All of our services are very much bespoke to your individual company's needs. And we are here throughout your entire process, whether you, again, are just looking at coming into the US. Maybe you've hired one person, all the way to if you have over 100 people in multiple locations across the country. We are here to help support you. So with that, we will get to what you're probably all here for, which is to understand if you can go home for the holidays. So I will pass it along to our vendor, who will kick off that presentation.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, before we hand it off to our vendor, RJ, let's go to the next, I guess, 2 slides ahead. Yeah, so before we pass it off to our vendor, you know, as Ashley said, the focus of this webcast today is to talk about the current state of travel limitations. As we know, you know, as the weather turns colder and becomes sweater weather here in the United States, jumper weather in the UK, you know, people's thoughts are turning to travel home. Normally, this time of year would be when you might be considering travel back to, you know, if you're in the U.S., back to the U.K. for the holidays to see family, whether it's for Thanksgiving or the Christmas end of the year holiday. And you know, this year is different than any other with respect to the pandemic and how it's impacted immigration and travel restrictions. So our goal today is twofold. One is to help you understand what current travel restrictions are in place, how they work, and how they would impact you if you decided to travel, if you're considering travel. I think some of you may learn that travel is going to be really difficult, and it may be something that's still possible with some changes, or maybe something that you decide not to do. But our goal is to make sure you understand what those restrictions are, how they work, and how they would apply to you. And then second, we're also going to talk about looking ahead, because as we look into 2021, we're all hoping for some positive changes in the pandemic, and in the United States, there's all signs point to a new administration in the United States, and all those things I think are going to impact immigration and some of these travel restrictions, and so they may change quite drastically going into 2021. So we'll do our best to look into the crystal ball and try to understand what things might look like in Q1 or Q2 of next year as well. So with that, I'll pass the baton to our vendor, who's going to walk us through some of the current travel restrictions in place and how they are being applied. Our vendor.
Perfect, thanks, Mark, and welcome everyone. So as Mark mentioned, I'm going to go through kind of the current state of affairs, some of the challenges, solutions, and this is really going to be relevant for both visa holders who are looking to travel, but also those who may be traveling or looking to travel using their ESTA. And certainly being a UK national, having worked in the US, I fully understand how important the free flow of travel between the UK and the US is. And so we want to make sure we focus on how you can effectively be able to travel into the US where possible and conduct your business and grow your business as you need to. So with that, there are 2 big proclamations or bans that are in play at this point in time. One of them is the travel ban, and the other one is the visa ban. We're going to start by talking about the travel ban, which prohibits travel into the US for individuals who have been in a variety of countries, including China, Iran, Brazil, UK and Ireland, and the Schengen area within 14 days of their attempted entry into the US. I think it's important to note that this ban does not apply to US citizens or green card holders. So if you're a UK national but hold a green card, you will not be impacted by this if you're traveling home during the holidays. And what we've seen is that there's really 2 broad strategies to overcome this travel ban. The first is traveling to a non-travel banned country for 15 days and then entering the US. For UK nationals, Mexico, most of the Caribbean countries don't require visas, but it's incredibly important that if you are going to look at that approach, you really do your research in terms of what the entry and exit requirements are for various countries, and make sure there's not quarantine requirements. Some of the countries have medical tests that are required. Some require you to go to state hospitals or facilities to stay in isolation period. So make sure you do check with those respective countries to make sure what their entry and exit requirements are. The second kind of approach to navigate the travel ban is to apply for a national interest exception with the US Embassy in London or the Consulate in Dublin. And we've seen a lot of those since they came out about 8 to 10 weeks ago now. We've assisted a lot of individuals who need to utilize those. And so we're going to take a little bit of a deeper look at these national interest exceptions for the travel ban. And I think it's important to know that when we talk about national interest exceptions, there's national interest exceptions for the travel ban that are separate to the national interest exceptions for the visa ban. So right now we're talking about the travel ban specifically. The national interest exceptions allow business travelers, investors, treaty traders and academics who are traveling from the UK and Ireland and the Schengen area to travel into the US, despite the fact that there is this travel ban in place. Now, the Department of State, when they issued these, they were quite vague in their requirements, which is great for us because it allows us to really advocate on behalf of our clients for these national interest exceptions. And essentially, what we're required to do is to demonstrate to the US Embassy or Consulate how and why the proposed travel will either provide a significant economic benefit or support public health in the US. And we're going to explore the semantics of applying for a national interest exception a little bit later through this presentation. RJ, next slide. Okay, in terms of the other big ban that's in place, we discussed the visa ban, which is issued initially in June of 2020, and it suspends the issuance of certain visa types. Of importance really will be the L1, the intercompany transfer, and the H1B, special occupation visa. Now, this is due to end on December 31st, 2020. The regulation, the way that it was implemented, does allow for an extension, but we're yet to see how that's going to play out. But as it stands right now, it's currently in effect until the end of this year. And in terms of applying for these, if you had a valid visa, one of these visas in June 24th of 2020, when it was enacted, then you may not be subject to this. And also, importantly, spouses and children wouldn't be prevented from obtaining a dependent visa if you, in fact, did have that visa on the day of its enactment. Other important points to note about this visa suspension is that it doesn't impact B1 visas, E1 treaty trader visas, and E2 treaty investor visas, or O1s as well. So you can still apply for those visas even though this visa suspension is in place. Now, as I said, it is set to expire hopefully December 31st. Hopefully that will continue, but we'll yet to see how that plays out. RJ, next slide. Okay. We're also going to discuss a little bit about what's happening with the US embassies and consulates. And this probably is the biggest logistical issue. If the consulates are closed or the embassies closed, it's going to be almost impossible to obtain a visa appointment. Fortunately, what we are seeing in Europe, and specifically with the embassy in London, is that they have been incredibly responsive. And I myself have reached out to the embassy in London on a few different points, and they've responded back to me within a day or two. So they are still working, even though they may not be physically present in the office, that they're still doing what they can to kind of move this forward and help the movement of individuals from the UK to the US. We've also seen that the Department of State this week reaffirmed their commitment to a phased resumption of visa services, which is definitely encouraging. They had previously in July said that they were going to resume on a post-by-post basis. That's still been reinforced in November, and we expect that trend to continue through to the end of the year, beginning of 2021. That being said, there is a substantial backlog. The embassies and consulates around the world, specifically UK and Dublin, which are probably two of the busier embassies, they do have a significant backlog. So, pre-COVID, we'd be able to get appointments within a matter of weeks. That may be extended. So if you are planning to travel, take that into account. Visa appointments, even expedited appointments, are taking longer than they usually would have. So we typically see that individuals who have visas may always plan to travel back during the holidays and process their visas and then return back to the US. That timeline is taking a little bit longer now, so bear that in mind. Now, next slide, RJ. And I should also mention just about the visas as well. What we're seeing, which is really good, is that London and some of the other European consulates and embassies are starting to prioritize e-applications. So individuals who applied for either a treaty trader, treaty investor visa, maybe during the lockdown, they're starting to see those get unstuck, get invited for interviews, and we've seen some approvals as well. So really good news on that front. And now I do want to just jump back into the national interest exceptions. And as we discussed with the travel ban, I want to take a deep dive and really explain what we're seeing in the ground in terms of these national interest exceptions. As I've said, we've applied for many of them since they opened. What we're seeing is typically the process is we would request the national interest exception to the travel ban from the US Embassy in London. We provide an application that explains and justifies why the trip is essential. Typically, the US Embassy in London has moved quickly on them. They have approved them within a matter of within 1 week, sometimes within a day or two that we've received approval, so they're moving very quickly. The key points with the national interest exceptions to the travel ban is that they are valid only for a one-time entry only, and the travel must occur within 30 days of the approval. And it's important to know that this is applicable for both individuals who have a visa and also ESTA travelers as well. And so some of the case studies where we've been successful is we've been able to get a head of operations for a creative design company out to the US, specialized technicians who are involved in installing, customizing equipment that they've sold to US companies. We've also helped senior management traveling for business meetings, which again, you know, we understand the importance of that kind of London, New York or connection where individuals are just, especially UK nationals, are just used to being able to hop on a flight from Heathrow, land in the US, have some meetings and come back. And we've been able to get national interest exceptions to facilitate those types of meetings as well. The other point to note is there's no limit on the number of national interest exceptions you can apply for. You can't apply for them all at the same time, but last week we had filed a subsequent extension for a subsequent filing for a national interest exception, which was approved again within a matter of days without question from the US Embassy in London. So providing you have a valid reason to travel back to the US, you have to disclose why you returned from the US and why you need to go back. But the embassy in London is amenable to approving subsequent national interest exceptions on the travel ban. RJ, next slide. Okay, now we're going to discuss the national interest exception as they apply for the visa ban. And again, remember, this is the ban that prohibits the issuance of L1s, H1Bs, and a couple of other visa categories. Now, what we're seeing on the ground with these, again, the UK, the embassy in London has been great at pushing forward emergency appointments for the national interest exceptions for these. And what we've seen is you do have to create a robust argument. Not everyone's going to qualify, but for those who do have a strong case, make sure you process your case quickly. Make sure you're prepared with all of your documentation. What we've been doing has been to work with the individual clients to make sure we do develop a robust application. The reason being, when you apply for the national interest exception, you would request an appointment date from the US Embassy in London. You would then follow their process to request an emergency appointment. Once an emergency appointment has been issued, you would then demonstrate with your evidence how you qualify for a national interest exception for the visa ban. And one of the cases, we had received a appointment date within 5 days. So if you're not prepared to present your case, it could backfire. So we've been taking the approach for all of our clients to make sure before we schedule the appointment, we're prepared. We've got a very strong case that's well documented, organized, ready to present to the embassy, and we've discussed that with our clients to make sure they're prepared. And some of the key successful cases we've had have been senior management or executives applying to transfer to the US, We've also worked with other individuals who are looking to resume employment in the US. So they've held a position in the US, departed the US, got stuck in the UK or another European country for some time during the lockdowns, and they need a visa to travel back to the US. We've been successful in able to get some individuals back into the US under that requirement as well. So with all that being said, that there are definitely some hurdles that we have to jump through. We all knew that. Traveling back for the holidays, I done it myself when I was on a visa and came back to the UK. It used to be a little bit more simpler. There are a few more hurdles, a few more things to consider before traveling, but there are some options. And with that, I will pass it over to Mark, who's going to go into some kind of scenarios and we can discuss some real world examples.
All right. Next slide. There you go. All right. Thanks, Arvinder. And yeah, just before we jump into these scenarios, so these scenarios are kind of the assumption of a UK individual who's in the US in certain situations, and what it would look like if you wanted to travel back to the UK for the holidays. But before we jump into that, again, I just want to stress again, as Arvinder was talking about the national interest exemptions, which are going to come into play in these scenarios that we're going to discuss. But for those individuals who are in the UK, for the next couple months, and who just have been interested in, can I do business travel to the United States? We just want to stress that the answer is yes. Yes, you can, as long as you can qualify for a national interest exception. And I think again, we've had quite a bit of success with those applications. So I think we've talked to a lot of business people who just assumed that there was just no way to even do business travel in the current environment, and that's not true. There certainly are options, and I think we're finding that a lot of the individuals, especially executives, or if you have really important business needs in the U.S., that we are able to get national interest exceptions to allow that type of travel. So keep that in mind. But these three travel scenarios I want to kind of walk through are for the individual who's the UK individual who's in the United States, and again is considering whether or not they should attempt to travel home for the holidays, and if they do, what that would mean. So for the first scenario, let's talk about a UK citizen who's in the United States. They have an unexpired visa. So maybe like they're here on an H-1B or an L-1 visa or an E-2 visa, and they're considering traveling back to the UK for the holidays, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas. So one thing to keep in mind, as soon as you travel back to the UK and you set foot back in the UK, you're going to trigger that travel ban, which again prevents individuals to come back into the United States if they've been in the UK for 14 days prior to the date they're seeking entry into the United States. Now, in this scenario, the visa ban would not apply because that individual already has a currently valid visa. So the visa ban only applies for that individual who needs to get a renewed visa on the trip home. For this person, they wouldn't need to do that. But because they've triggered the travel ban, before you can return to the U.S. in this scenario, you have one of two options. Either you do have to obtain a travel ban NIE, and you'd want to talk to us or another attorney to see if you are eligible for a national interest exception, and then you need to obtain that before you'd be able to come back into the United States. Once you got it, you'd have to return within 30 days of getting that NIE. Your other option, as Arvinder mentioned, would be to travel to another, after you go back to the UK, before you come to the US, travel to another intermediate country where you will stay for 15 days and then enter the US from that country. It's got to be a country that's not on the list. Again, Mexico has been popular, some of the Caribbean islands have been popular, but again, you have to be very careful to check their entry requirements, whether from an immigration perspective and a health screening perspective. But again, I think for a lot of people in this scenario, that's going to be your decision. Is if you go home, you need to understand that to get back, you're going to need to either get a national interest exemption, which is possible, but is not always guaranteed. And I think that's something that you're going to want to know what your chances are of getting that NIE before you book your travel, so you don't get a situation where you go back thinking that it would be easy to get an NIE, and maybe you're a case that isn't as compelling as it would need to be to get an NIE. So for individuals in these scenarios, if you're going to travel back, you need to realize you're going to trigger the travel ban, and then you're either going to have to get an NIE or you're going to have to do this intermediate country travel, which maybe you don't have the luxury to do. Another kind of ancillary option here is we've heard some clients who are going to meet their relatives from the UK in Mexico or at the island and spend time with them there, so they can still see their family but avoid having to go back to the UK and actually triggering this travel ban. Okay, next slide, RJ. So the travel scenario 2 is now for a UK citizen who's, and again, keep in mind, as our vendor said, if you're a UK individual who has dual citizenship with the UK and the US, or you're a UK citizen and you're a green card holder, none of these things apply to you. You are going to have the ability to travel, despite these restrictions. Now, in travel scenario 2, we're talking about a UK citizen who's in the United States on, let's say, L1 or H1B status. Now, the way immigration works in the United States is you have the concept of you need to have a valid status that you maintain while you're in the United States, and you also but you have to have a valid visa at the time you're seeking entry into the United States. And so it's perfectly permissible for an individual to, let's say their last trip, they came in while their H1B or L1B visa was valid, and they were admitted for a 3-year period of status, and so that's still unexpired. But in the meantime, their visa has expired. And again, that's perfectly allowable. But normally, when that person goes outside the U.S., they have to get a new visa, renew their visa before they can come back into the United States. So in this scenario, we have a UK citizen who's in the United States in valid H-1B or L1 status, but their visa has expired. So if that individual is going to go back to the UK, also they're going to trigger the travel ban right away, just because they're setting foot back in the UK. But also, since that individual is going to have to renew their visa before coming back to the United States, it's very possible that the visa ban is going to apply as well. Now, as our vendor said, there's some confusion that, the proclamation when it came out said that individuals who are in the U.S. on June 22nd when it came out, they're not subject to the visa ban. But where there's been some confusion and there still hasn't been clear guidance, does that mean if you were in the U.S. on June 22nd, or I think it's June 24th actually, if you're in the U.S. on that date, but your visa is expired and now you still need a new visa, does the visa ban apply? Arguably, I would argue that by the plain language of the proclamation that it shouldn't, but Department of State has not yet come out and confirmed that. And in fact, they've given conflicting guidance, which makes it seem that possibly the visa ban would apply in that scenario. So I think it's safe to assume in this scenario that person is likely also going to trigger the visa ban, and so their ability to get that new renewed visa in the H or L category, because those were two of the categories covered by the visa ban, that may be not possible. Again, with the caveat that, again, remember that the visa ban as it currently stands is effective through December 31st. Let's say that the current administration doesn't extend that travel ban, and so it does expire on the 31st. If you travel home for the holidays and normally would be subject to the visa ban, but you plan to travel back in January or February, then it's possible that the visa ban may no longer be in place, and it may not apply to you. But assuming in this scenario that the travel ban and the visa ban are going to apply, a person in this scenario, when they travel back to the UK before they can return to the US, first they're going to have to obtain a visa ban NIE. And as our vendor said, if you apply for a visa ban NIE and it's granted, they're going to give you the travel ban NIE at the same time. So that it's kind of a 2-for-1. But then also, once you've secured the visa ban NIE, you're also going to have to get a visa appointment to go and get your visa. And as our vendor mentioned, there are currently delays at the consulate in London. It could be 6 to 8 week delays to get an appointment because of the backlogs they're facing right now. Unless you can get an emergency appointment, which again, if you have a compelling reason why you need to get back and the consulate agrees that it qualifies as an emergency, you may be able to get that. But you have to keep that in mind. Okay, RJ, next slide. So travel scenario 3 now is a similar situation. UK citizen in the US, they have an expired visa, but it's in the E1, E2, or O1 visa category. Now, those visa category, even though that person is going to need a renewed visa, those are visa categories that are not subject to the visa ban. So this individual, yes, they would trigger the travel ban as soon as they step foot back in the UK. But although they do need to renew their E1, E2, or O1 visa, to come back to the U.S., the visa ban doesn't prevent them from doing that because these are categories that weren't covered by the visa ban. So that individual, before they come back to the United States, they would just need to get a travel ban NIE, assuming they qualify, but then also secure their visa appointment to get the visa and come back. And then once they have their visa, they would have to make sure they're returning their travel or have return travel scheduled to the U.S. within 30 days of receiving that NIE. Okay, RJ, next slide. So to further complicate these things, you know, if I'm you listening to this webinar, this webcast, and I'm trying to plan, you know, my travel, you know, you're looking for some certainty, so you can plan around things and put plans in action. The reality of the situation, though, is there just isn't a lot of certainty right now, and I know that complicates travel planning, but that is the current situation, unfortunately. And so, you know, one thing to keep in mind, you know, we're talking about how those scenarios would work and interplay with the visa ban and the travel ban. Well, the first thing to think about as we look forward to 2021, and as I said, you know, all things point to a new administration here in the United States who would be sworn in on January 20th. You know, all signs point to immigration changes happening in 2021. And most likely, they're probably going to be favorable changes under the new administration. But just for example, when we talk about the U.S. travel ban and visa ban and trying to understand how that might impact your travel, again, with the visa ban, keep in mind that expires on December 31st, and it's likely that between now and January 20th, the current administration could seek to extend that. But then when the new administration comes into power on January 20th, they could very well first day rescind that visa ban or modify it or change it in any way. We just don't know. So all we can tell you today is that the visa ban is on the books. It's still in play until December 31st. What it looks like after December 31st or after January 20th is really hard to predict. Same with the travel ban. Now, the travel ban doesn't have an expiration date at all. Again, but also it's very possible that could be rescinded or modified by a new administration come January 20th. We're just not sure. I know that doesn't make it easy for planning purposes, but again, that is the current situation. You know, other possible changes in the immigration and travel arena we can anticipate as we look into 2021. I think as far as immediate changes, again, we've heard the new administration has published an immigration plan. They've already started hinting at what some of their initial immigration actions may be. And the thing to keep in mind is that any immigration change or travel restriction that was created by the current administration through executive order very likely could be reversed through executive order and done very quickly by a new administration. So it's not out of the realm of the possibility to expect some new immigration executive orders out of the new administration as soon as they take power. They've already hinted that maybe even on day one you may see a removal of the Muslim country travel ban that was in place since the beginning of the current administration. You may see overturned immediately, and extended the DACA program. You may see the visa ban or the travel ban rescinded on day one or very soon after the new administration takes power. So anything that was created by an executive order by the current administration very likely could be changed very quickly by the new administration, and we're going to have to wait and see. We won't know until January 20th. Obviously, the administration is hinting at some things, but until we actually see it happen, it's not safe to plan around it until it becomes effective. Now, as far as some of the other kind of gradual changes that we might see or gradual trends that we might see, keep in mind that the current administration also put a lot of new immigration policies and some restrictive policies in place through regulation. Anything that was put in place through regulation, if the new administration again has hinted that they are probably looking to roll some of those back, but the process of rolling back something that was implemented by regulation can take a little bit longer and is a little bit more of a complex process than something that was done by executive order. So we do, while we think that you are going to see some other bigger picture immigration changes as we move into 2021, they may take some time to see how they play out. And if it's anything that requires a new law, obviously we're going to have to wait to see what the makeup of Congress is and what their willingness is to pass immigration legislation. But I think generally speaking, we're comfortable saying that I think you're going to see more favorable adjudication trends on all immigration applications. Over the past 4 years, the pendulum had swung towards much more restrictive adjudication trends on applications. Applications that had been approved in the past were having trouble being approved now. I think you're going to see the pendulum shift back in the other direction towards more favorable adjudication trends under new administration. Again, in the published immigration plans of the new administration do include the possible expansion of some employment-based immigration categories, and even possibly the creation of some new categories, which would businesses and individuals looking to work in the United States. And I also think, and we're already seeing this now, but I also think you're going to see a trend of consular services continuing to improve as hopefully the pandemic improves with vaccines coming out. As those things improve and they start getting more of their staff back in the office and getting on top of their backlogs, I think you're going to see some of the delays that we've been suffering with the past year are going to start getting less lengthy and getting back to normal consulate processing times. Last slide, RJ. And then also just on the horizon in 2021, for those companies who do hire H-1B workers, which, if you have U.S. operations and UK operations, and in the U.S. you're hiring individuals on H-1B, which can be used for individuals who are not just UK citizens, but citizens of any country. Keep in mind that there's this annual filing period for the H-1Bs. There is a quota on those visas. That annual filing period is going to start March of this year. And so if that's something that you're thinking about doing, again, not too early to start talking about that now, because usually by January, February, you want to start getting things in order to be able to register for that by March. And then also, I think one of the biggest takeaways you can take away from this webcast here today is that, again, we do believe that the immigration environment is going to trend towards a more favorable environment for UK businesses and UK individuals who are looking to operate in the United States. That's good news. And so if you were a business that was looking to initiate expansion plans in Q1 or Q2, or an individual who had plans to come to the U.S. to work or invest in Q1 or Q2, the likelihood of you being able to do that is a lot more high than it was just a couple months ago. And despite the current travel restrictions that are in place, you are still able to file these applications now and have them start processing. And so it's not too early to start planning ahead. And in fact, in many cases, not even too early to start filing applications. And if you were going to file e-visa applications can currently be filed at the US Consulate in London, and normally those take 30 to 60 days to process. You can get that processing started now, so that when it's approved, hopefully we're in an environment that's much more open to immigration and a lot less restrictive on travel, and you can come instead of waiting for the travel restrictions to go away, and then you start the process. Well, then you're only going to delay yourself another 2 or 3 months after that. Also, things like an L1 visa, which normally might have to be applied. An application has to be submitted with the U.S. Immigration Service in the United States. You can still submit that application, get it processed, even get it approved, so you have it, so that when the travel restrictions are removed, hopefully, then you're able to just immediately go get your visa and come to the U.S. So if you have Q1, Q2 expansion plans, travel plans, you should be starting to plan those now, and in many cases there's going to be applications you can file right now to lay the groundwork for your ability to come over here to the U.S. at that time. So I guess in closing, we want to say that hopefully you've learned what the current travel restrictions are, how they might impact you, and that there are options available to still travel and get back to the U.S., but it's going to be harder than it has been normally. But we're here and to help guide you through that if you have questions. And then also, I think looking ahead, it's been a rough year for everybody. But from an immigration perspective, 2021 one looks to be pretty positive, and I think we will see a positive trend towards less restrictive environment and a more welcoming environment for businesses looking to do business in the U.S., which is a great thing for the UK and the United States, frankly. So with that, we'll open it up to questions and answers. Ashley is going to moderate that for us. So Ashley, if there's any questions, shoot those out and we'll do our best to answer.
All right, we've got a lot coming through. So I think if we can kickstart with some that are more focused on the travel ban, and again, if people have questions that you still want to have answered, please feel free to put them in the chat. But an interesting one that came in: does the travel ban apply to visa holders who are married to a U.S. citizen?
So that you still will need to obtain it. The questions that are asked by the US Embassy in London, the process is you would request a travel ban. They send you a questionnaire and you'd include the information about your US citizen partner, and that there shouldn't be an issue to get approved. So it should be quite straightforward for those to get approved. It also depends on how that individual is going to be traveling into the US, whether they're going to be traveling using an ESTA or whether they're going to be, if they have a marriage-based green card or they're US citizen themselves as well. So a couple of factors, but if they are going to be traveling on either a visa or using an ESTA, if they haven't proceeded with obtaining a marriage-based green card or US citizenship yet, then that they would be able to get that travel ban.
And when you say our vendor too, though, so even though yes, they're going to have to apply for an NIE, but the threshold of getting it is going to be a lot lower than some other categories. But to make things easier, we would recommend that you travel together, because if you travel separate, I think it's going to be a little bit harder and more complicated. Yeah,
absolutely. But yeah, I think if your spouse is a US citizen, it shouldn't be difficult at all to obtain that.
All right, thank you. So another question regarding travel: to what extent can a UK national residing and working in the US under a variety of visas, can they leave the US to go to Mexico and come back for the holidays?
I'll tell you. I mean, yeah. So it's actually pretty straightforward. So Mexico, if you're a UK citizen, there really aren't any. You don't need a visa to get into Mexico. Typically, as long as you show you have some status in the U.S., entry into Mexico is not hard at all. And in fact, even from a screening perspective, our understanding is they're not even really doing much of health screenings or anything like that. So, getting into Mexico as a UK national, from what we've heard from people who've done that, is not an issue at all. And then again, returning from Mexico also, has not been an issue.
And I guess in that same vein, are there any other countries that are also mutually excluded from the US and UK travel bans where families could meet for the holidays?
So it's really, I mean, it's any country other than China, Iran, Brazil, UK, Ireland, and the Schengen countries. So the rest of the world, now, again, so that's a pretty broad list. But then the secondary level of analysis then would be, it's okay, as a UK citizen, where is a place that I can go and get into without a visa? And again, as UK citizen, that's also still a big list of countries. And then I think the last level of analysis would be as well, then, okay, well, what are the maybe specific health screening requirements of those countries? And some countries may require you to have taken a COVID test and have a negative result before you can admit, or they may even have their own quarantine requirements. So that's the last thing that you have to look at. But yeah, generally speaking, it's any country other than those listed.
Great, thanks, Mark. And so then, what are the current restrictions when landing in the UK? So basically, do travelers from the US have to quarantine?
So in terms of landing into the UK, there is guidance that obviously everyone should self-isolate, but there's no mandate requiring it. But the best guidance for travel to any country really is to make sure you're checking just before flying out that particular country if they've had any requirements. But the UK is pretty open, and these requirements change so quickly. I mean, this is a moving goalpost, as it were, with COVID. So check before you're traveling. Even if you check when you book the flights, make sure you're checking the week of travel to make sure there's no additional requirements for entry or exit.
Thank you. And Emmanuel from BAB is asking, is there any chance that non-business EEA citizens are able to travel to the US in 2020 on an ESTA directly and not via a third country? Is that at all a possibility?
I think if I understand the question, he's just asking, do we see a possibility that a person would be able to come into the United States without having to go to the other country or without having to get an NIE in 2021?
For non-business purposes, so just coming because I'm assuming you just want to come
for recreational
shop for the holidays or something.
Right. For a person who's a UK citizen.
Right.
Yes. So there, I mean, I think again, the national interest exemptions are built around people who are coming for mostly for compelling business travel reasons. If you're coming for a personal reason, that's simply leisure, recreational. I think your chances of getting an NIE are very low. Now, there are non-business reasons that you can still get an NIE if we've had clients who had medical issues or need medical treatment that they normally would get in the U.S. and need to be able to come to the U.S. to get that medical treatment. That's a compelling personal non-business reason to come in. But as far as just for leisure recreation, I think it's going to be it would be very difficult to make a case for an NIE until this travel ban gets lifted.
Thank you. And then I'm not quite sure if we're going to be able to answer this question, but are there any sort of flight corridors, I'm assuming within the U.S., to minimize the potential 7 or 14-day quarantine requirements?
There aren't any that I'm aware of. I mean, there's been some broad discussions that about potentially having a travel corridor between the UK and US, but I mean they're not anything that's been grounded in anything. But hopefully that we'd love to see some of that. But I'm not aware of any other travel corridors into the US. Mark?
No, not at all. I mean, it's certainly something that's been discussed, but it hasn't gone anywhere.
And I see that Joe actually asked that question as well about the air bridge between New York and London, and there were some rumors floating around that was being put forward, but obviously now with the UK, the entirety of the UK going under lockdown and New York seeing cases increase and potentially going into a secondary lockdown, it's basically become a moot point, unfortunately, until we see some improvements within that health outcomes. So I think if we can switch from speaking on travel to, we have a lot of questions about some more specifics within the NIE. So you did cover about the timeline, which looks to be about a week for that processing, but is there any cost associated with the NIE process?
There are no government filing fees to pay. So it's simply the process is very quick. Everything's done via email with the US Embassy. London specifically has been incredibly helpful. As I mentioned before, I've emailed them a few times on particular issues that I needed clarification on, and the officers have responded very quickly. And it looks as though, in terms of the way that they're approaching these applications, they really are reviewing them. So it is important to be well prepared and documented. We had a particular case where I went back and forth with an officer, and it was a very friendly conversation with them via email, but they were interested to understand a little bit more about the purpose of the trip, and we were able to explain that, provide some additional information, and they ultimately approved the national interest exception. So there are no government filing fees. Be prepared, be well documented, explain why you need to be there, why it's time sensitive. for you to be there, and we're seeing good results in those.
And that is a good follow-on then. What documentation would you suggest to prepare when applying for an NIE?
Yeah, so the way we've been approaching these is, one, we have to understand the nature of the trip. Why is it essential that you go there? If you are traveling, there's a variety of reasons you may go there. There's exceptions that allow, if you've sold equipment into the US or to a US company and you have to go to install or configure that equipment, you can go in what's considered after-sale services. If you're going for a specific reason with a client that's based in the US, if you can obtain documentation, a letter from them explaining why you need to be in the US, we prepare a support letter that justifies and argues why the client is eligible for the national interest exception, why they need to be in the US, why their work can't be produced remotely, or why they cannot continue to work remotely. So documentation may include letters from your clients, your providers in the US. It may have contracts or statements of work from any US clients that you're working with that requires you to be in the US as well. And then just having, I think the biggest part of this is telling a compelling story as to why you should be in the US. And bear in mind, the officers are human beings. They're reviewing this. We're all kind of going through this pandemic together, and I think the officers, especially in London, have been really fair in their adjudications of these national interest exceptions.
And I would just add to that too, it's not just showing the importance to you why you need to be in the U.S., but you want to tie that into the importance to the U.S. company and how your presence in the U.S. is going to actually help further the economic recovery in the United States. And so if you can say, look, I'm coming over for a meeting, but if this meeting is for a new contract for new business, and if we get that new business, we're going to expand our business in the U.S., we're going to hire new people. We had a person who needed to make some trips over to recruit some executives and sit in on recruiting meetings that were going to result in the hiring of new U.S. workers, or anything where you can tie, relate it to the benefit to the U.S. company and then ultimately a benefit to the U.S. economy. The more you can do that, the more documentation you can show supporting that, the better chances you have.
So can you apply for an NIE and get an outcome before leaving the US, or do you have to be in the UK? And I guess a second part of that, is there any reason that you would have to visit the embassy in London in person and able to get an NIE?
So if we separate this question, for the NIE, for the travel ban only, you don't need to go to the US Embassy in London. It's all done remotely. The approval is also sent via email. The visa ban, if you're looking for a national interest exception for the visa ban, then you would need to go and apply for your visa in person, present that documentation as though you would any other visa. Now, if we revert back to the travel ban, if you're in the US and you're thinking, well, I want to try and get this national interest exception to return back before I even depart the US, in theory, you can absolutely do it. The officers reviewing the case, they send out a questionnaire that they ask you to complete. They'll ask you where you're resident, your personal information, explain why you qualify for the NIE, and they will issue it. But they're not tracking to see where you're actually located physically in the world. The only caveat is if you are not a resident of the UK. So you're not here for work purposes, you're not a UK national, they do want to understand why you're coming, and that's purely to stop individuals from traveling around the world trying to find a country that they can get a national interest exception from.
Thank you. And we have several questions, and I know that we are running very short on time. We have several questions that are a little bit more specific on individual visa types. I think that's something that we'll probably take offline because those are going to probably be a little bit more individual circumstances. But I guess a good question would be, so what proportion of those NIE applications have been successful? So what can people expect when they apply? What's their rate of getting a positive response?
So we've had a phenomenal response in the UK specifically, but also across Europe as well, as we've assisted our clients applying for them. You know, again, and it goes down to when we're preparing the applications, when we're speaking with our clients, we're explaining what we're seeing on the ground as it moves and as the trends appear. And so we would only recommend presenting a case if we know that it's going to have a good chance of being successful, based on our experience and how we've been handling these. So I think for well-documented cases, it's very successful. And again, the criteria to qualify for the travel ban national interest exception is very broad. And so it gives us a lot of room to be able to really advocate and explain and justify the benefit of travel into the US. And for the visa ban national interest exceptions, again, the criteria is slightly more narrow in that they're more defined. And again, it requires, you know, working with an attorney to really hone in and explain, would you be a good candidate for this? Can you put your best foot forward, and can you create a great application that's going to be successful? And if you do that, I think the embassies in UK specifically, but also around Europe and other parts of the world, have been really, really fair in their review of these cases during this time.
And I would say too, I mean, the cases that when we talk to folks and we say, we're not sure if you're going to have a strong enough case, there are cases where, maybe they just really want to come to the U.S. to do some client meetings, but they haven't been able to explain a compelling reason for those meetings and why those couldn't just be accomplished via Zoom. And those are the kind of cases that are probably weak. And like our vendor said, we wouldn't recommend filing those cases. So we're only filing ones that we believe are going to be approved. And so, we have a very high success rate there. I think the other issue that is a little bit unknown how it's going to play out, but right now when we apply for NIEs, it's for a person who's been sitting in the UK and for several months and now wants to come to the US, and so we're making the argument for what that compelling reason is. And like you said, we've had a lot of success. For people we're talking about today who are in the US looking to go home for the holidays and come back, I mean, to me, that could add another compelling element to say, look, I'm just trying to come back to the U.S. and this is where I have been here. My work is here, everything I do here. I came home to see my family. I haven't seen them in a long time. I'm coming back from the holidays, but I need to go back to the U.S. just to go back to what I was doing before, which is different from someone who, and I would argue maybe even more compelling than someone who's been sitting in the U.K. and asking to now come over to the United States. So again, I don't, we're going to see how that plays out now over the next couple of months because we haven't seen people returning home, but I think that'll be interesting to see how the consulate handles it. But in my mind, I think that adds to the compelling nature of your argument. If you're saying I have been here in the U.S. for many months, this is where I work, this is my job. Now I'm just asking for an NIE to get back there.
Thank you. And I guess final question, because I know we are definitely over time now, but did want to address a couple of visa questions. Mainly, what are you seeing as the appointment times? It looks like we have one person that they didn't get quoted for an appointment until August of 2021 for a renewal of an E2. So, but we also have several questions on your expectations for getting normal appointment times for either new visas or visa renewals, but then also are people able to apply for emergency appointments if they do come across those very lengthy wait times for the normal appointment?
Yeah, these are really good questions, and this is kind of largely uncharted territory for the US embassies. I mean, a lot of them have been closed since March. As we mentioned during the webcast, they are starting to resume their normal services, and so they've got a backlog of cases that have been pending since March through to now, and then typically the holiday season is probably one of their busier periods throughout the year. So, we're seeing some of the appointments get scheduled 6 to 8 weeks out. You can request emergency appointments. The process for requesting them, you really have to demonstrate, again, an exigent need to be able to travel to the US. So that could be humanitarian grounds. It could be that there's going to be severe financial hardship caused to an employer not being able to travel. The cases that we've been able to get emergency appointments within a matter of days, they've been senior management and executives of companies who are traveling, need to transfer out to the US, and we've been successful in that. What I would say is, as we approach the holiday season, expect that the processing times, so the appointment dates, will start to extend out. And I think the scrutiny required for an emergency appointment will probably increase, as well as more individuals will try to obtain an emergency appointment. And again, the emergency appointments, they're discretionary. So the officers at the embassies, they have the ultimate decision as to whether they think an emergency appointment is justified. And then in terms of the appointment dates in August, yeah, we've seen globally appointment dates be pushed out to various months. What I would say for those is go back in and check and see whether there's earlier dates available, as the US embassies around the world continue to resume their services and continue to have the officers return back to the embassies and consulates. Those dates may just move up, and so I think what the embassies have been doing is putting in placeholders that are just way far in the future to buy themselves some room. So check back in through the visa processing service and see if earlier appointment dates are available. Check your junk folders as well, because there may be emails from the embassies explaining that early appointment dates are available too.
All right, thank you. Well, now that it is about 10 past 1 here in New York, I think it is probably time for us to wrap up. For people who asked questions that we were unfortunately not able to get to, we will try to answer those and send them around along with a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar. So just really want to thank Mark and our vendor and RJ behind the scenes, and everyone at Ellis Porter that helped put together this presentation. Hopefully you found it useful and that there are some options for UK citizens to be able to travel into the US. So if you have any additional questions or if you would like any of our support from either Ellis Porter or from the Department of International Trade, please do not be afraid to reach out to us, and we will certainly try to help you as best we can. So thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Ashley. And yeah, happy holidays to everyone, and here's hoping for much more positive new immigration news in 2021. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.